There is one tight end who finished inside the top 5 last season that I keep trying to talk Jared into moving down our rankings. And I'm going to do it again on this show. Will it work? Will he go with me? Or is he going to keep pushing back against me? I guess you'll have to wait and find out. But an all new episode of the Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to talk fantasy tight end rankings. And Jared, we just talked about running backs and wide receivers on the past 2 episodes. To me, there's a key difference when we're talking about tight ends, and that is, in most cases, it's a one starter position as opposed to 2 to 3 of each of the others. Those are often also populating a flex spot in your lineup. So the difference with that one starter spot is it becomes at least as much about how to draft the position as it is about whether to target or not target specific players, because you have to consider where it is that you want to get your tight end and then kind of look in within that framework to who makes sense for your build. Whereas with running back and wide receiver, I think you have to look at guys that you like and say, well, this is where you have to take him if you want to get him. I think if you're doing that to the same degree at tight end, that's where you can get yourself into trouble.
For sure. And I think opportunity cost is always a big thing for me at tight end too. Like, if I have to take this tight end in round 2, which we're going to get into with Brock Bowers, like what is that costing me at the other positions versus, waiting until round 6 or, waiting until round 10. The other thing with tight end too, I would say, and it's the same thing at quarterback, is the strategy changes a lot in best ball versus lineup setting leagues. Because in best ball, obviously that position needs to be solidified after your draft. Whereas in lineup setting leagues, tight end is definitely a position where you can wait super long in your draft for your first, take a couple, and end up streaming at the position throughout the season.
Yeah, you can totally end your draft with I don't like these tight ends group at the position. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of times somebody will emerge from that group and become somebody that you do like. I think we'll talk about a player or two like that from last season. And then other times, you just fix it later on because it's a position that's pretty easily fixable off of waivers in most leagues. Just like our previous ranking shows covering quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, we will be revealing the top of our tight end rankings at DraftSharks.com. We're also going to talk key targets, some tight ends that we're fading in drafts right now. And if you're not familiar with our 3D value system for rating these players, these rankings that we're going to be talking about are different than what you are used to from seeing on whatever other sites you choose to look at for some reason because you like to punish yourself. Most outlets just rank tight ends and the other positions by either their baseline projections or some sort of ranker consensus. So ours starts with those baseline projections that have delivered multiple accuracy awards throughout the years. But over the past few years, we've made the valuation system a lot richer by adding in ceiling projections, adding in floor projections. We factor in consensus projections. That's not what drives our rankings, but it is one factor that goes into the overall calculation. And we compare value across positions, of course, making sure that that's specific to the format. So all of that comes together to give that 3D value for every player. And that is what determines these rankings. And it's customized to the exact specifications of each format, whatever format you're looking at the time, whatever format we're talking about at the time, complete with auto-generated tiers to show the true value breaks in your rankings. We have used half PPR rankings for the running backs and wide receivers. We're using Underdog Fantasy ADP as our primary source right now, which is also a half PPR format. So we're going to stick with that half PPR, looking at the tight ends today. Tier 1, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride. Jared, I don't think that will surprise anybody who's watching this show. Those two are going pretty easily ahead of the rest of the group and very early in drafts. And I think more so than how good you think the player is, what you think of his situation, how early they're going in drafts is probably the most important factor to consider with both of them.
Yeah, for sure. So we have Brock Bowers at tight end 1 in Underdog ADP. He's going at 206 right now, so middle of round 2. And we don't need to spend too much time about how good Brock Bowers was last year. He finished tight end 3 in expected points per game, tight end 2 in actual points per game. It was the second most points per game by a rookie tight end in NFL history. The question is, like you were alluding to, Matt, do we pay that mid-second round price tag for Brock Bowers? That means taking him over guys like Drake London, AJ Brown, Devon Achane, Jonathan Taylor. That's tough for me. I think for Bowers to pay off, you almost need like prime Travis Kelce fantasy production. If you look at prime Travis Kelce, that was like 15 to 17 half PPR points per game. Brock Bowers last year, for as good of a season as he had, 12.2 half PPR points per game. So he still needs to make, I think, a pretty big jump. Say, call it like 2 to 3 more half PPR points per game to really pay off the price tag he's going right now. And I have no concerns or issues with the player. I think he's good enough to do that. My biggest concern is with the Raiders' pass volume. Last year, the Raiders were 3rd in the NFL in pass rate, 4th in the NFL in pass attempts. I think those numbers are going to come down significantly with the addition of Ashton Genty, with offensive coordinator Chip Kelly coming in, run leading play caller. So I just think Bowers is going to struggle for the volume. And I just don't think he's going to put up a huge touchdown number. I think it's possible because he's a good enough player, but I just don't think the Raiders offense is going to be good enough to get him to like 10 to 12 touchdowns. And he's going to need one of those things. He's going to need even more volume than he got last year or more touchdowns to pay off the ADP he's at right now.
Yeah, and those are all kind of little factors that you're mentioning, but that's really the point. He's going so early in the draft that it's little factors that you have to look at and that could make him not worth that spot. And really, he could finish as the top scoring fantasy tight end and still not be worth the pick that you have to spend on to get him. So that's my problem with Brock Bowers. Excellent player. Obviously, when you set the NFL record for rookie receptions as a tight end, there's no telling what you are capable of doing later on, but he will have to dominate tight ends to be worth taking Bowers where you have to take him this year. If you want to take that shot, go for it. I'm not going to be doing that like basically at all. Trey McBride, similar for me. I'm a little bit more in on him because he's going slightly later, but it's the same kind of issue. Like I want to have some just in case he dominates Arizona targets and is the number 1 scoring tight end in PPR, especially by some margin that could make a difference, especially in a single league. But he's not a specific target for me because he is going too early to be that specific a target.
Yeah, he's not a prime target for me. I do think the price on McBride is more palatable. He's only going half a round later than Brock Bowers. Trey McBride is right now is at 301 in underdog ADP. If you look at the guys, you have to take them over in that range. Josh Jacobs, it's Rashee Rice, T. Higgins, Garrett Wilson. Those guys are all, to me, and our rankings would say this as well, like at least a tier below the running backs and wide receivers. You're taking Brock Bowers over. So I think McBride is a bit easier to take. He's still not a top target for me. There's a guy we'll talk about next that I think is a much better value, but McBride was really just as impressive as Brock Bowers last year. He finished tight end 3 in points per game, despite only scoring 2 touchdowns. He's going to score more this year. Everything else, the usage, the efficiency was elite for Trey McBride last year. He's still in the prime of his career. So I think Trey McBride is right there with Brock Bowers as our tiers would suggest. Like it's really a 1A, 1B. And I do think the price tag on McBride makes a bit more sense than it does on Bowers.
Tier 2 is one dude all by himself. Number 3, George Kittle. He's also number 3 in ADP, as you just mentioned, but the more important number here is exactly where he's going, and that is nearly 2 full rounds behind number 2, Trey McBride. So yeah, he's 3rd to McBride's 2nd, but you're also gaining a lot more draft value before you take Kittle as your tight end if you choose to take him as your tight end 1 rather than McBride or Bowers.
Yeah, and George Kittle led all tight ends in half PPR points per game last year. It was not Brock Bowers. It was not Trey McBride. It was George Kittle. Now, he was just 5th at the position in expected half PPR points per game. His role, his volume was not as strong as Bowers or McBride. I don't think it's going to be this year, but his role could be better because there are more questions in San Francisco's wide receiver core right now than there were heading into last season. Deebo Samuel gone. Brandon Ayuk coming off the multi-ligament knee injury. I don't think he's going to be ready for week 1 and probably won't be himself until the second half of the season. Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, there are still questions about both of those guys. So Kittle, especially the first half of the season while Ayuk is still working back, could be an even bigger part of this 49ers offense. And he has shown no signs of decline. He was at 2.66 yards per route last year. That was his best mark since 2020, and it led all 43 tight ends with 30-plus targets last year. So despite the fact that he's about to turn 32 this October, there have been no signs of slowing down for George Kittle.
It's an age where we still have to worry a little bit, but we've got Travis Kelce playing beyond that age. We know that George Kittle takes good care of himself in the offseason, so I'm going to stick with believing in Kittle as well. We'll see where it goes. Tier 3 is another guy all by himself, Sam LaPorta at number 4. This is one that I'm not clicking. We've talked about the Lions before. The overall question is, can the offense be as good? But even within that, like even if it is as good or even if it's worse, the biggest challenge for LaPorta is all of the guys that need feeding. And I don't think that he is a top 2, probably even top 3 talent among those guys that are waiting to be fed.
Yeah, LaPorta, one of the most disappointing tight ends in fantasy last year. If you look at where he finished versus where you had to draft him, LaPorta finished 9th among tight ends in half PPR points per game last year. He was 11th at the position in expected half PPR points, and his volume and his efficiency declined last year versus where it was in his 2023 rookie season. His target share went from 19.8% down to 16%. His yards per route from 1.76 to 1.61. If you're a Sam LaPorta bull heading into 2024, you could point to the fact that he was much better over the second half of last season than the first. If you just look at the last 8 games last year, including the Lions playoff game, LaPorta across those 8 games was tight end 5 in points per game, tight end 6 in expected points per game. He did have some injuries he was dealing with last August and early on last season, so maybe that was a factor in his slow start. But again, even those numbers over the second half of the season, like they're below where he's being drafted right now. So, could LaPorta finish tight end 4 or even better? Yes, but I just don't think the cost is worth it when you have guys going 2, 3, 4 rounds later at the position that I think could give you similar production.
And if you're like, yeah, but he led tight ends in scoring as a rookie the year before, then he played through injuries last year, you got to recognize that he did so with some fortunate touchdown luck that season. Yeah, is that possible? Again, sure. But that's kind of what you have to bet on unless you think he's going to siphon a whole bunch of target share from Amon-Ra St. Brown or Jameson Williams or some other source in that Detroit offense. I don't see it. Tier 4, a lot less exclusive than those top 3 tiers in our half PPR tight end rankings. Number 5, Travis Kelce. Number 6, Mark Andrews. Number 7, Jonnu Smith for now. Number 8, TJ Hawkinson. Number 9, David Njoku. Jared, I think it's fair to look at this range of the rankings and say, you guys have Travis Kelce too high at number 5. I would not so much argue that point as I would say, pay attention to the tiers here because Travis Kelce at number 5 is 6 3D value points behind number 4, Sam LaPorta. He is just 3 points ahead of number 9, David Njoku, who's the last guy within this tier. And Njoku, in turn, is 4 points ahead of the next guy behind him who starts tier 5. So basically what we're saying is, yeah, Kelce and Njoku at 9, that whole group of 5 players is very close together. I think that you could basically shuffle them in any order, except for the one guy that we'll talk about that I don't think belongs here.
Yeah, and listen, with Travis Kelce, I don't really want to be in on Kelce, but he's going in the 9th round of fantasy drafts. It's tough for me to not get at least some Travis Kelce at that price tag. He was tight end 8 and half PPR points per game last year. Despite bad touchdown luck, he scored just 3 times last year. He had 8.7 expected receiving touchdowns. That was tops among all tight ends. And that, expected receiving touchdowns is based on the number of targets he's getting and where those targets are coming. Travis Kelce was 2nd among tight ends last year with 33 red zone targets. He was 10th with 7 end zone targets. So the opportunity for touchdowns were there. They just didn't come. We know that's volatile from season to season. I would expect him to score more this season than last. And that's going to help offset what I think is probably going to be fewer targets. He saw 133 targets last year on a 23% target share. I think those numbers will come down, assuming the Chiefs wide receivers are healthier. Kelce's also a player definitely in decline, to what level it's tough to say, but he did set career lows last year in a lot of receiving categories. But for me, again, it's just 9th round ADP for a guy I think is still going to be a pretty significant part of a Patrick Mahomes led passing game. I just think it's tough to pass up on him at that price.
You have to consider the risk factors. Yes, he performed worse last year than previous seasons. Maybe that was more decline than him being out of shape. Yes, they will have a healthier set of receivers this year, and that definitely could challenge his target count quite a bit. But on the other hand, he's also seen a ton of targets every year for a long time. So maybe it won't. Maybe he still gets targeted at that same level. I mentioned the whole weight loss thing kind of tongue in cheek here and there about Travis Kelce. I don't really care about specifically how much weight he lost or, exactly what's going on with that story. Just that it's out there that he's talking about it tells me that he's driven to fix something that wasn't good enough for him last year. So I think at the very least, we should expect something similar in terms of ability and inclusion to what we saw with Travis Kelce last year, with a chance that there is some rebound to him in an offense that's just, been friendly to him for as long as any of us can really remember.
Yeah, just posted a shark bite this morning on Travis Kelce, him kind of being all in still, Patrick Mahomes being impressed by what he's seen from Kelce this offseason. So I'm not worried about motivation. Again, he's 36 years old now, whatever it is. He's definitely past his prime, but I do still think he's fully motivated this season. That's not a concern for me.
Jonnu Smith is the guy that I don't believe belongs in this range, and here's why. 10.6 half PPR points per game last season, his first in Miami, his career high by a wide margin. The previous high was 8.0 with the 2020 Titans. That was his last season in Tennessee. No other season in Smith's career has finished with more than 6.0 half PPR points per game. The Patriots signed him for more than $10 million a year after that 2020 season. The Falcons traded for him. They didn't give up a whole lot in the trade, but they did take on a contract that was still pretty sizable. The Dolphins signed him ahead of last season for $4.2 million a year on a 2-year deal. So you can already see that salary declining as he moves through teams. He had that 2024 breakout, relative to his previous scoring at age 29. Now he wants a contract boost. The Dolphins would apparently rather trade him than give him that contract boost. So there are a couple of big factors at play for me here. One, the later in a career that kind of stat breakout happens, the more skeptical you need to be of it. I think the more likely it is because of certain conditions for that season, as opposed to the player doing something better or people finally figuring something out about him. If you've been in the league for that long and started for multiple teams, they've figured you out, and something happened in that season to, bring out the numbers rather than you finally reaching your potential. The other factor here is that every team that has drafted or signed or traded for Smith to this point has voluntarily let him walk rather than giving him that next contract. So that kind of adds on to the previous point to tell me that he's a fine player, but there's nothing special about him. And every team has been like, ooh, I like that. And they get him there and they're like, not really a fit for what we have to pay him. So we've talked about the other members of the Miami offense and the limitations of last year's Miami offense and what set him up for big target volume, which then produced all that fantasy scoring. I think Miami will be and should be working toward making changes that will make it tougher for Jonnu Smith to score those points this year. I think there's a whole lot more downside risk to him anywhere inside the top 10 than there is attractiveness to actually target him within that range.
Yeah, and I don't really disagree. Jonnu hasn't been a target for me. We are ahead in ADP, though. His ADP has sunk since the trade rumors, and I think that obviously adds some risk. If Jonnu Smith was dealt to Pittsburgh, that would kill his fantasy value. So that obviously adds some risk to his profile, at least until that kind of situation has resolved itself. I'm with you, Matt, that I think Miami doesn't want to give Jonnu Smith as many targets as he got last year. I'm also not convinced the offense is going to be able to be a whole lot different, because that offensive line still looks like one of the worst in the NFL to me. Maybe even worse. They lost their left tackle, so it might be even worse. They might be forced to throw quick passes again. And then there's the fact that Jonnu Smith was just good last year. It wasn't just the usage giving him the fantasy production. It was the fact that he was just efficient with it. He was 5th among 44 qualifying tight ends last year in targets per route, yards per route, and PFF receiving grade. 5th among 44 in all 3 of those categories. So it wasn't like he was just this, mediocre player that was force-fed volume and produced because of that. He actually played well last year. So I'm with you that Jonnu has a wide range of outcomes, but I do think the outcomes do include, him putting up a similar season to what he did last year.
I don't. I think that you always have to say when something happens, obviously you can't say that can't happen again. I don't think it will. I don't think that you are saying that you think it will. I think where we split here is on the likelihood that it does. Last year, whatever measures you want to look at, they're outliers versus the rest of his career. He doesn't have this string of performances along those lines, and then finally the volume matched the performance. Many of the factors were better, different last year than at every other point for the rest of his career. And I think sometimes it can be tough to overcome subconscious recency bias when somebody puts up numbers like that and figure out how to adjust them for the following season. But I think Jonnu Smith specifically is a case where we need to figure out how to adjust those numbers down, because I think there's a much better chance that he finishes this season as tight end 15 than as tight end 7.
To me, the outlierish numbers last year are a bit easier to believe in because it came in a brand new offense with a new coaching staff. And the reason to maybe expect him to continue going forward is that he's in the same exact situation heading into 2025. Same quarterback, same offense, same target competition.
I guess we'll have to take the rest of this conversation offline. We'll see who I can convince to get on my side. And you'll be able to tell if you check our tight end rankings and see how far Jonnu Smith tumbles. Dalton Kincaid is not a guy that's inside the tier we're talking about right now, but he's at number 10, which currently tops tier 5 in these half PPR rankings. He's also at number 10 in our full PPR rankings. If you look at full PPR, though, Kincaid jumps into that tier 4 group with those players. I feel like that's where he belongs in either of the scoring formats. And I especially like Dalton Kincaid right now at his tight end 14 underdog ADP, at his tight end 15 ADP on drafters, which is full PPR. And really, the case is pretty simple, I think, for Dalton Kincaid. Buffalo drafted him in round 1 just 2 years ago, 2023. Look at Khalil Shakir's 2024. Now, Khalil Shakir, I think, is a good player. I don't think he's a special player. I think he combines efficiency with being in a good spot. Last year, he led Buffalo in target share, but he didn't dominate target share. And then he was very efficient with the targets that he did get. So he did a great job of turning those targets into, floor level fantasy production, and that boosted him. Dalton Kincaid, if he's healthier this year, and assuming that the Bills still like him and see whatever it is they need to see from him this summer to believe that he's a key piece of the receiving game, I think that he should be well set up to have a similar type of impact, a similar type of set of opportunities and upside as what Khalil Shakir gave us last year. And now that he is outside of top 12 territory, the bar is much lower for him to actually have a successful fantasy season versus when we were drafting him much higher last year and even the year before as a rookie.
Yeah, I think the range of outcomes is wide here for Kincaid, but I think the price tag makes him pretty easy to bet on. You look at the usage last year, it was all really strong. 19.7% target share. That was up from 2023, 16.6%. Targets per route, 25.7%. That was up from the previous year. Even the yards per route for Kincaid was up from 2023, 1.46 in 2023, 1.62 last year. Part of the issue was his catchable target rate was way down. It was at 90% in 2023. That was never going to last, but it tanked to 69% last year. Some of that's probably on Kincaid, maybe just not creating separation, not getting open enough to get those catchable targets. But I also think some of it's just volatility on a smaller sample, and it's probably going to rebound a bit heading into 2025. He also dealt with multiple injuries last year. There was the week 10 PCL sprain that cost him a few games, and he was limited in terms of playing time and production after returning from that injury. And we just learned recently, he suffered another injury to his right knee. It was a Morel Lavalley lesion, which is something I've never heard of. Something sounds pretty rare.
Come on, Jared, you don't know exactly what that means.
I defined it in the Shark Bite up on the site if you want to check out. I still don't know what it means, but I did type out what it supposedly means. Sounds like that was a factor as well, and it was late in the season, so it wasn't a huge fantasy factor. But point is, he just dealt with a bunch of injuries last year. There's been a lot of positive buzz on Kincaid lately. I even just saw a story that he told the Bills PR firm that he's not going to do any off-field community work this offseason because he's just focused on football. Yeah, definitely like to hear. So I could definitely see Kincaid bouncing back this season. And again, it comes down to price for me. If I can get him as tight end 14, tight end 15, I think that eliminates most of the downside on him.
Yeah. And to be fair, there have also been some words from the Bills coaches and maybe front office this offseason indicating that there are things that they need to see from him, like that he has worked in the offseason to get stronger physically in certain areas so he can withstand the rigors of an NFL season. And he does certainly need to improve his play, continue developing. So it's not all, he had bad injury luck, and now that that's better, he'll be just fine. There are things he needs to do. We'll watch him through the summer. And it might be that by August, the words aren't as rosy and I'm not as interested. But if you're just like, Dalton Kincaid's burned me before, I'm out, you're ignoring that he's now a lot cheaper than he was when he burned you before. And he could do the exact same things as the past 2 years, and it wouldn't burn you. It might just it's not as good as I was hoping it might be.
Yes.
If you have any strong feelings on Dalton Kincaid, on Jonnu Smith, or on any of those other top 10 tight ends, let us know in the YouTube comments. You will certainly hear back from us. I enjoy hearing what you think, even if I read it and think that you're nuts. I'm still enjoy taking all of it in. We're going to flip over now to the targets at the position, Jared. And I feel like we should probably even just skip past David Njoku, because every time we talk about tight end, we're like, yeah, I want David Njoku. Okay. And then beyond that, there might be some other tight ends that I like. He is my third most drafted tight end overall. He's tied for my most drafted tight end since the NFL draft on drafters. He's tied with Dalton Kincaid, who we just talked about. I love the price on him. And he's also tied with Evan Engram. And Evan Engram is an interesting one to me because usually a player like that ranks that highly in my player exposures at a position is because I think that he's undervalued at ADP. I don't think that's the case with Evan Engram right now, although maybe it was a little bit ago and he's climbed some. He's currently tight end 7, tight end 8, depending on which best ball site that you're drafting. I think that's fair and maybe even a little bit overpriced, but with where he's going overall, he's just a nice draft fit as my first tight end versus the other positions, the other players that I'm considering at those positions at that point in the draft. Because even if he doesn't outscore that starting position, I think that Evan Ingram's going to be the kind of guy that sees a consistent level of targets and gives me a decent score week to week. And if I can set my best ball base at tight end with that type of guy, then I feel more open to play around with who follows him.
Yeah, the opportunity for Ingram is definitely strong. I think I'd call him the favorite to finish second on the Broncos in targets this season behind only Courtland Sutton. I haven't drafted much of him, partly because of the fact that he's tight end 8 in ADP. He definitely was cheaper even a month ago. He was closer to tight end 12. He's climbing. I just have concerns about the player. Ingram will turn 31 this coming September. Last year, his rank among 43 qualifying tight ends, he was 21st in PFF receiving grade. He was 30th in ESPN receiver score. Where that really showed up was after the catch. He averaged a career low 3.2 yards after the catch per reception last year. And he was worse among 33 qualifying tight ends in next gen stats, yards after catch over expected. So, he should have done more after the catch than he did last year, basically is what that's saying. I have concerns that he's just a declining player. Denver doesn't seem to have those concerns with the move they made to get him. And Sean Payton has talked up Ingram's role in the offense. So again, the opportunity is going to be there for him if he can just hang on and not, totally tank this year. I think he'll be an okay pick at his current ADP.
Yeah, I think if we had all those numbers from last year and he was just in the same spot or signed a small 1-year contract with somebody, I'd be like, yeah, this is a declining guy I'm not interested in. But that season is an outlier statistically versus the previous, and it was for a very bad Jacksonville team that had a struggling Trevor Lawrence, then had Mac Jones, had a coaching staff that got dumped, and then Sean Payton's like, ooh, I got Evan Ingram finally. This is the joker I've been looking for. So now I'm like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and trust Sean Payton on whether Evan Ingram's still good rather than my own take on what we got from him last year. So I like him at cost. Like I said, he might be slightly overpriced there, but I do think that there's attractive target upside. I would say not only that I think he's a good bet to finish top 2 among Broncos, I think there's a decent to good chance he leads this team in targets overall because he's going to be an easier guy to target than Courtland Sutton. And that possibility is what makes me in on him at price. Probably a guy that I like even better for a lineup setting team than for a best ball squad. Who are you targeting at tight end besides David Njoku?
Right. I don't draft much Ingram because Njoku goes like significantly behind him. He's tight end 12 in ADP. I think he's the most mispriced tight end on the board right now. So I'm going to keep drafting Njoku as long as his price stays in that range. I like Jake Ferguson at tight end 17 ADP. He dealt with multiple injuries last year. He obviously missed his quarterback, Dak Prescott, for the second half of the year. If we just look at Ferguson's 7 games with Dak last year, though, he was tight end 10 in half PPR points per game. He was tight end 6 in expected half PPR points per game. Pretty similar production and usage back in 2023 too. 10th in expected points per game that year, 9th in actual points per game. Does have more target competition now with the addition of George Pickens, but I think that's, the ADP has gone too far, knocking him down to tight end 17. As we've talked about on previous podcasts, we expect this Cowboys offense to be one of the pass heaviest in the NFL. If that's the case, there is room for Ferguson, even as the third option in this passing game, to I think pretty easily beat that tight end 17 ADP.
Yeah, Jake Ferguson's one of my top 2. I think he might be my most drafted overall if you look at the whole best ball season so far. I was especially drafting him before the NFL draft, before they traded for George Pickens. I agree, though. I'm still in on him at the current price, and especially if I have Dak Prescott as my quarterback, which with where they're going now is possible. Like if I don't have Dak, then Jake Ferguson's a bit more forgettable in that range, but if I already have Dak, it's a very good fit. Any other tight end targets for you?
Yeah, a deep one. This is, best ball only as a tight end 2, probably a tight end 3, but I like Chig Okonkwo at tight end 27. We have him 20th in our rankings. And if you just look at his final 5 full games last year, so it's a small sample size, but over those final 5 games, 22% target share. He was tight end 8 in expected fantasy points per game, tight end 13 in actual points per game. There was a lot of praise coming from head coach Brian Callahan on Chig Okonkwo over those final 5 games, kind of saying like he thinks it finally clicked for Okonkwo. So I'm excited to kind of see what he does heading into 2025 now. Likely quarterback upgrade for the Titans in Cam Ward. Still no strong number 2 wide receiver on that roster. They did draft Gunnar Helm in the 4th round, tight end out of Texas. So we'll see how he fits in with Chig. But I think there's potential for Okonkwo to be the number 2 target in this passing game this year.
So you're just in on Jonnu Smith and all Jonnu Smith lookalikes, huh?
Much cheaper, Jonnu Smith. Younger as well.
Yeah, I can't be strongly against Chigakonkwo, but he's not somebody I'm super interested in. We've got 3 years of limited kind of opportunity, but he's going late enough that even if he stays in the same kind of role, it's fine. It's certainly not going to hurt. In the later regions of drafting, I like Hunter Henry at tight end 21, Mike Gesicki at tight end 23. I think the fact that Gesicki is still down there, despite signing a 3-year extension for pretty big money with these Bengals, shows that the market is like, no, I don't trust either the numbers he put up when T. Higgins was hurt or the numbers he put up in the final 2 games of the season when T. Higgins did play. I think instead the market's like, no, I still remember the time when T. Higgins came back and Mike Gesicki disappeared. And to me, that's just a mistake. At the very least, this is the tight end and likely number 3 target in the most pass-friendly offense in the league. I think that you don't have to do a whole lot of figuring beyond that. That guy should be mixed into your player exposures and should be going higher than tight end 23. Hunter Henry is perennially underrated. I think if you think the offense is going to be any better this year and that Drake May is going to be any more successful this year, then you have to be taking some Hunter Henry.
Yeah, I like both those guys. With Gesicki, I just think he's a better bet for touchdowns this year. He scored just twice on 65 catches last year, despite being in this offense. We talked about it with Joe Burrow. He led the league in basically any passing volume metric, like in or around the goal line. So just the amount of times the Bengals throw near the end zone, I think Gesicki is a much better touchdown bet than what he showed last year.
Yeah, I will add that I think Gesicki is much more of a best ball guy than a lineup setting guy. I think he's probably going to be the kind of guy that we don't want to trust in lineups then, but I like him right now. On the fade side, it starts with Brock Bowers for all the reasons we mentioned earlier. Jonnu Smith is a guy for all the reasons I mentioned that I'm not targeting. Colston Loveland, I think, is too expensive inside the top 12. There's certainly upside to both him and the offense, and I'll force a few shares when he slides past ADP. I think that's worth pointing out. Not just for Loveland, but players in general. Like there are some players that I just don't want anything to do with. Loveland's one of those, like, I don't know what his 2025 is going to look like. So when there's an opportunity where he's like around past ADP, I'll go ahead and toss him on a roster just in case, he does have this unforeseeable rookie season.
Yeah. And again, we're looking at underdog here where Loveland is tight end 11. And we talked about underdog rookies get pushed up and probably for good reason. I think it's too extreme a lot of times, and Loveland is a case of that. We do know rookies are better over the second half of their debut seasons, and that makes them more valuable with the underdog format. I still can't get there with Loveland at tight end 11. I love the player and I love the long-term fit, but I just can't get there for this season from a volume perspective. I'd be very surprised if he out targets either DJ Moore or Rome Odunze. I think Luther Burden is right there with Loveland if I'm projecting targets in 2025. And then I still think Cole Kmet is going to stay involved to some degree. It seems like Ben Johnson probably isn't the biggest fan, just the fact that he spent the first round pick on Colston Loveland, but Cole Kmet has been an efficient pass catching tight end for most of his career at this point. So I don't think he's going to go away completely. It's just going to be tough for Loveland to draw enough targets to pay off his current price.
Yeah. And by the way, he's tight end 13 on drafters, which is obviously a little bit better. And that's where I'm getting a little bit when he slides past ADP. I still think that's a bit overpriced. And the key difference there, as we've talked about before, no playoff weeks on drafters. So we're looking at full season value as opposed to those playoff weeks at underdog that do make a rookie, with upside a bit more attractive at draft time. Brenton Strange, one more I'll throw out, that he's like fine at cost, but I don't see the upside to force him in. And he's going ahead of Hunter Henry, ahead of Mike Gesicki. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Agreed on that one.
It's always nice to end these things on agreement. But I think Jonnu Smith is the sticking point from this one. We'll talk about him plenty more going forward, both behind the scenes and on these podcasts. You can check out our best ball ADP market index page to find more values and fades at the position. And you can sync your league of any type at draftsharks.com to get tight end rankings, custom fit to the exact scoring and lineup settings that you are playing. We will be wrapping up this ranking series with IDPs next week. Then it's on to a dynasty startup mock draft and the team preview series. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Draft Sharks podcast wherever you are accessing it right now so that you don't miss a thing, because at Draft Sharks, we want to be your unfair advantage.